A couple weeks ago, I bought this online, and it looks like a generic piece of metal. However, it cost me close to $1,000, and if you held it, you'd immediately notice something weird. It feels abnormally heavy, and this is because it's osmium, which is the densest element. It's even denser than gold, and it's about twice as dense as lead. It's also extremely hard to find osmium in nature, and it's one of the rarest elements on Earth. When it comes to fire, the most common color is probably orange or red, and this is usually from burning something like wood. What I've always found interesting, though, was how many other colors are possible, and it can really depend on what's burning. For example, if I add a solution of boric acid and methanol and light it on fire, I get a really nice green color. I can also throw some aluminum into an acidic copper solution and get a blue flame. What I think is even cooler, though, is what happens when I burn nitromethane. It actually doesn't burn on its own, and I have to give it a boost with some methanol. Now when I try it, I get a flame that has almost no color. There is a slight hint of yellow, but besides that, it almost looks like it's in black and white. In my opinion, it kind of looks fake, and I think this is better than anything with color. A few months ago, I bought a dry ice maker, which was pretty much just a denim sock strapped to a CO2 tank. After running it, I loosened it up a bit, and I was left with some nice and powdered dry ice. I really wanted a nice block of it, though, so I bought a different tool thing to make it. It looks a lot more complicated than a fancy sock, but it also doesn't seem too crazy. I think that all I have to do is connect it to a CO2 tank. I quickly skimmed the instructions, and the only warning was to keep the pressure really low. So, I guess I'll just go ahead and try it out. As the CO2 leaves the tank, it's a liquid, but when it enters the plastic thing, it's all becoming a solid. Now, apparently all I have to do is wait for the whole thing to fill up. When it started spraying out the side, I figured it was done, and I closed the tank. The next step is to carefully remove the strap thing and open it up, and I have a nice cylinder of dry ice. It isn't perfect though, and it's a lot more fragile than I thought it would be. Either way, I don't need the whole chunk of it, and I only need about half. A little while ago, I cooked a match in the microwave, and it made some scary plasma, which I thought was fun. The only problem was that it also damaged my glass beaker, and now I have to sacrifice it. I don't want it to completely go to waste though, and I've decided to try and recycle part of it using a microwave. So, I'll pick out a few pieces that I think look nice. Also, I thought that it would look even better with some color in it, so I sacrificed this brown glass bottle. I then put all the pieces onto some ceramic fiber, and I started setting up the microwave. I pulled everything out, as well as that little plastic spinner thing, and I put in some KO wool. I then added the bottom half of a kiln, and I put the glass pieces on top. The last step is to cover it with the other half of the kiln, and I'm good to go. From what I saw on the internet, all I have to do is heat it on high power for about 6 minutes. At first, it didn't look like much was happening, but the kiln was heating up. It was absorbing the microwave energy and turning it into heat. It was also trapping all of this heat inside, and it was hopefully getting hot enough to slightly melt the glass. The idea was to melt them just enough so that the pieces would fuse together. After a couple minutes, it was already red hot, and it slowly got brighter inside. When it was eventually done, I had to wait about an hour for it to cool down. Okay, so now it's time to open the kiln, and it's not at all what I was hoping for. I thought they were all gonna get fused together, but they're completely separated. I think I might have run the microwave for too long and at too high power. Either way, I think they still look pretty interesting, and I think they kind of look like eyes. After taking them off the fiber and cleaning them up a bit, I'm actually really happy with how they turned out. Okay, so today, I've decided to dissolve my wiener in acid. I'm not just going to be using any acid though, and I'm going to be using something special called piranha solution. It's a hot and angry mixture of sulfuric acid and hydrogen peroxide, and I basically just have to drop it in. It almost immediately turns black, and this is all carbon. Now, if I add some more peroxide, I can vaporize the carbon and turn it into CO2 gas. I think it's pretty obvious, but I'm still going to mention that this is extremely dangerous. If any of this splashed on me, it would do something very similar, which wouldn't be super pleasant. It eventually looked like there was barely any of it left, and it was just a sad little meat noodle. Then, over the next 30 seconds or so, it calmed down, and it was ready for another wiener. For this one, I'm gonna try and synthesize a bouncy ball. To get things started, I'll add about 300 mils of water to a beaker, and I'll turn on the stirring. Now, I can dump in some sodium hydroxide drain cleaner, and I have to wait for it all to dissolve. When I didn't see any left, I turned on the hot plate, and I waited for it to heat up. It now seems pretty good, and I can start adding some sulfur. I'll do it slowly to not mess up the stirring, and in total, I'll add about 30 grams. At first, it doesn't seem like much is happening, but the sulfur is supposed to be reacting with the sodium hydroxide. The sulfur should be turning into a mixture of molecules called polysulfides, which are soluble in water. This process is really slow though, and it took about 30 minutes for most of it to react. I'm eventually left with this dark orange mixture, and when I turn off the stirring, all of the unreacted sulfur sinks to the bottom. To get rid of this sulfur, I'll get another beaker, and I'll pour out just the dark liquid. I'll also add a stir bar, and what I have to do next is wait for it to cool down. This ended up taking about 40 minutes, and now it's finally time to make the bouncy ball. To do this, I just need to add something called 1,2-dichloroethane. It again didn't look like much was happening, but then the color quickly changed, and I started seeing some solid stuff. This was all something called thiocol rubber, and now I basically just had to wait. For a while, it kind of just looked like a mess, but then it started clumping up into a chunk that was rolling around the beaker. Over the next 20 minutes, it slowly got bigger and bigger, and when I felt that it was done, I turned off the stirring. What I had to do next was pull it out, and I was really hoping to see a nice ball. However, it was a lot more rectangular than I expected. I then washed it in some water to try and get rid of some of the chemicals. So now, after all that work, I have a little rubbery cube. It isn't as round as I was hoping for, but it's still really squishy, and I think it should be able to bounce. Okay, so I don't think I can call it a bouncy ball, and it's more like a kind of bouncy cube.